And this is a great lead-in question. So how did you get the deal with AMC? How did that come about?
Well, we actually, literally, it was because of our social media community that we built. The short story is, like I said, we put up a Facebook, and what we did is we created like 8 pieces of the making of this film. So we engaged in our online community, and we gave them something every few weeks to come back and look, and we would just watch those numbers grow. And when we hit about 76,000, we put it up on a site called Eventful, a demanded site. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of them.
Excellent site if you don't know it, yeah.
And it really started for concerts and political campaigns, and they would put up these events saying demanded to come to your city. So these sponsors, or like with us, the distributors would look and say, okay, I know exactly where
So they
the
came to
people are.
you? They came to you?
No, we put this up, and
Yeah.
within, again, a couple of weeks, 23,000 people demanded it, so they called us.
Yeah.
And
So
they-
what is the status now? I mean, obviously, you said it's expanded to 40 cities.
We were, and
Yeah.
we just came out. I think we may still open in Memphis, in a small theater in Memphis, an indie theater.
Tremendous. And
And Kansas.
are you looking to continue that with the DVD release? And the reason I ask is, some of you may have been at an event a couple of years ago. I was interviewing Ira Deutschman, who's an esteemed member of PGA East. Ira's got a company that's actually launched the month after 9/11 called Emerging Pictures, and he does these interesting sort of date and day releases of DVDs in theaters, a lot of niche content, and it was very interesting because that seems to really work. So a lot of music, different films around ethnic groups or gay groups, but he's found that real niche, and it seems to really be working with what you've done with Muslim. I mean, because it's a hot topic, and now hopefully it'll really catch on again. So.
Well, also, I think you have to keep in mind as a producer, I just want to say that, I think with that when you have a religious-based film, you have an inherent audience. And you just have to get out there to them. And I think so this is just a tiny bit of the audience for this film are the people that really are online. I still think it's a younger person's community. But it's much easier to reach out to a religious-based film than it is to potentially a action-based film or a film noir, a different genre. There's certain genres that have inherent audiences. So I think also as producers, we have to be smart about that. And part of your job is when you take, I'm an indie film producer. I've spent my whole life in production and making films. And I have a very bizarre relationship to money on a personal level. So when I take somebody's money, I'm adamant about doing the right thing by it. And if I don't do the right thing by it, I don't get to keep working. So, you have to be responsible when you take somebody's money. And when you do that, when you read that script, you have to know who's the audience for that script, and that's where it starts.
Well, it's interesting that you said you were a quote-unquote, getting back to faith, non-believer in social media. But I mean, one of the before, right? But you've hit on something, and since Mayad alluded to Jeff, I'll just point out Jeff Gomez is in the audience. Jeff, if you don't know, is really the leading progenitor of transmedia. He runs a company called Starlight Runner, which is literally just 2 blocks away, or a block away, if you will, in Union Square. And if you may have been at the fabulous masterclass he did here last October. But one of the interesting things that Jeff and I were talking about earlier is that you have more and more, since Jeff and I were working with a group to put together the first new media producer credits last year for the Guild, and the transmedia producer credit was very buzzworthy and a tad controversial inside and outside of the Guild. But what we're finding is independent producers like Dana who are leading themselves into transmedia by saying, look, I have a story I want to increase across multiple platforms. I don't want it to just be static or siloed. And so you have essentially found a way, of course, also to monetize and leverage whatever your upfront is on the investment. Both the transmedia and also the youth side of this audience. I mean, I just want to take a step back and say that with all of you know, the xenophobia around Muslim themes and even just cultural ignorance in the U.S., you would think that you know, we would realize that enough winning of hearts and minds and even pocketbooks with an audience of many millions of people, and many of them who are young and you know, as Maya had so brilliantly pointed out, have probably done in a much faster trajectory what you know, bombs could never do in terms of moving things. So you know, and if Maya, if you can just sort of start, you know, and go down the line here in terms of that youth side of things, what does it take to convince a backer, if you will? I mean, you had, you know, somebody who basically was telling you what to do with an Iranian documentary, but even just saying, well,
commissioning editor, not a backer.
What's that?
I was a commissioning editor. But.
Yes, yeah. Let's be clear in our terms. Thank you. But you know, talk a bit about that. I want everyone to really get into this, and particularly you, Tariq. You know, that there seems, you know, to be, you know, it's much more than a political struggle, but one of having stories told and being able to successfully cross market.
I mean, I think for us, you know, as an independent producer and filmmaker, you know, you have to try to find, especially as an American independent filmmaker and producer, because things are definitely different in Europe and Canada, you have to find money from nowhere. The money does not exist. No one gives you money. There's no grants per se. There is no government entity that subsidizes you. And so you have to think about these things. And I think for us, we got very lucky because you know, there was no such thing as an industry around this type of story. What we wanted to do was we knew that we had to not only create economy around our own projects, but create an economy around this type of storytelling in general, so that these films can be made. And you know, I'm not a demographer, I'm not a marketer, but I was looking for an answer out of sheer frustration, which is what I was telling you. And you know, I knew that Iran was very young because obviously I'd heard it. I'm Iranian, and so. But what I did know, and this was during the war between Israel and Lebanon. I was in Guatemala producing my second feature, comedy, had nothing to do with the Middle East, with Ben Gazzara. I was all excited, and I would come home at nights exhausted as the sole creative producer on the project, and would be confronted with these emails that my friend was sending me, whose elderly parents just retired to South Lebanon, and they were missing. So she was sending two emails, one blast email to people she knew who had contacts in the region, and I worked as a cinematographer in conflict zones for years before I started making films, and another one to people who her friends, try to see if you can find her parents or try to stop the bombing, the Israeli bombing on Lebanon. And I realized then that, you know what, this was a much bigger issue than A, Iran, and B, that, you know, this is what I wanted to be doing. I didn't, you know, as much as I loved what I was doing and I was making movies and that's what I wanted to do, I wanted those movies to be about things I cared about. And so it was that led us into looking at how can we do this? And what we found was a phenomenon. Extremely young, fastest growing segment on the internet, as Tariq was saying. Last I checked, which was about a year and a half ago, JWT reported that simply the American Muslim population has $170 billion disposable annual income. The global Muslim population is currently valued at $3 trillion and is going up to $30 trillion by 2050. That's a big climb. So what does this mean is that there is an inherent value in things that have value to these communities. And that made a very, very compelling case. I wasn't particularly interested in making films targeted uniquely at any community. I wanted to, you know, I was very much interested in the world in which we were beyond these differences. But what I knew, demographically speaking, or from a financial point of view, if you could tell people that, look, there is an inherent audience that's actually growing and exists currently, and that there is not only going to be value in this film now, but value in this film as new people from this audience come into this market space, and you can demonstrate that you can actually communicate and speak their language and understand what the pitfalls of losing that audience, and also if you can demonstrate that you can reach them, then you have a pretty good chance of being able to raise money because it's a no-brainer. And it's a wave, but if you look at it, the ships are already out. Sony, Disney, Warner Brothers, all of the big corporations, international
right, and you've
corporations
worked with all the
are
big
already
studios,
there.
right?
Yeah, they're already thinking about this region. They're already thinking about how to market to them. It's already solidified.
Modest, does the Arab Spring make it easier for you to make a pitch now? I mean, we're now 4 or 5 months into, this phenomenal, sort of uprising, if you will. Does it make it easier for you to come in and make that kind of presentation?
In terms of helping clients raise money?
Yeah.
I think that actually I've been speaking to people and they're actually having a hard time raising money. That's not to say that there's not money that's out there, but I think that there is a real concern at times, depending on the nature of your project, of course, whether or not you're able to raise funds, and I think there's some very prominent people that I've spoken to quite recently that have really wonderful projects that would have legs, and projects that within the region at least would really have a huge audience. They have stars, they have all those components, however, and they're looking to raise something like $50,000, and that's hard, and $50,000 isn't a whole lot of money. And the question for me always, and I think for a lot of my clients is, well, what's it going to take? And this week we have a number of fundraisers and small house parties to make asks for projects that are quite worthy and that have an emphasis, incidentally, on film. But the Arab Spring, one would think, would balance that out and to kind of.
Well, is it a leading indicator then? I mean, if we were to do this event 6 months from now, maybe it'll be vastly different. So, but it sounds at least that the conversation is there. It's just that the flow may not be.
One component, just from I think in the media or in some of the work that's out there, is that there is a bit of a fatigue, I think, and it's a difficult thing to acknowledge, but I think that for the past, post 9/11, it's been 10 years, and a lot of terrible things about the Middle East have been happening, and it's in the news all the time, and the economy is bad, and there's a number of different components. It doesn't mean that there isn't a market for it. There absolutely is, and I think that the people on this panel have exhibited that.
Well, one thing before he leaves, because I know he's got to leave soon, so I do want to give him a shout out. One great thing that has happened is the Doha Film Institute, and we happen to have Chadi Zenedine, who's a resident filmmaker and programmer, and he has materials over there at that desk. And Chadi, are you here? Can you? Yeah, please stand up. Give him a warm welcome. Phenomenal program, and I guess you were a title sponsor of the Tribeca Film Festival, which recently concluded. So please try and buttonhole him before he leaves. If he should leave beforehand, we will get his information to you. In fact, we will just send it out to everyone who RSVP'd, because this is a growing relationship with the Guild and with Chadi and Doha Film Institute. So thank you for coming. So thank you, and to be continued. So Tariq, I mean, Muslim, obviously you presented some amazing figures. I mean, the youth side of this seems to be tremendous from both, inside of the countries that you're dealing with primarily, but also inside of the U.S. as well. I mean, as a truly global company, and you've only really been around a couple of years, but your story is phenomenal. Talk about, how Muslim came to be and really, took off. I mean,
yeah, I think the global change is phenomenal right now. When I went to business school and I did my MBA, and I do look younger than I am, so whatever we learned from the marketing perspective, and I teach at NYU, has changed. We were taught that you need a lot of money. If you want to have media, you have to have a huge budget and all that. Today, you really don't even need media budget. There are examples, of companies and brands who are so popular. I mean, Charlie Sheen has 2 million followers. Lady Gaga is really knocking everybody out, and they're not spending a penny on their branding, and they're doing through social media. There is a misconception and misunderstanding by a lot of companies out there. And when we go to the companies and we talk to them and we say that we help you with your social media, and everybody say, oh, we have that taken care of. So recently, one of our clients, I don't want to name them, they said, no, we are doing pretty good. We have a Facebook page and everything. What else can you do? And we asked them to give it a shot because we can really reach a target audience. And whatever numbers they had in followers in an entire year, we knocked that off in a month. Yeah. And they say, where did you bring these people from? And because it's a different mindset. But in any event, I think the reason Muslim came about is that we understood that there is a large population of Muslims. When I grew up, my parents wanted me to be home, and they thought that I'm okay. Today, my 12-year-old daughter can be right in front of me, and she could be talking to somebody 72 in Philippines, and I have no idea. So the reach is so huge.
And to that, and I didn't play this video because you know we had so many things to get through. But Tarek's quite the world travel. He was recently at the cricket finals, and he had a great CNN piece, and we'll send that to everyone as well because it's just cool. 18,000 kilometers in like a couple of weeks, and he Skyped in from Mumbai, right before the final. Of course, India won. And it was just tremendous, and I thought it was also interesting because we were talking about cricket earlier. You know, I mean, this is yet another one of these niche kind of things that could, in a kind of fractured, disintermediated world, you know, you never know. I mean, talk about that a little bit.
I think, yeah, it's amazing that, you know, and actually we helped a company, you know, follow that up also. What people don't realize today is just the power of social media, which is not very expensive. And companies question when we tell them that we can really give you that many eyeballs, that many people, and that many followers, and it's so cheap. So companies are really not ready for that, but at the same time, they really want to take advantage of that. And just coming to the Muslim market alone, you know, as I said, that there are 250 million Muslims online, which is larger than many countries.
And how many were there 5 years ago?
We have grown 500%.
Right. That's astonishing.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you help me get to them? The DVD's dropping in like 6
Yeah,
months.
see?
I was
Now, this is why we do these events. Number one, what people join the guild to network, to
I'm not
get
kidding.
gigs. And we do these events to network and get gigs, of course, but also to recruit people to join the guild. But, you know, this, of course, is being taped. And by the way, a shout out to Peter Servieri and Scribe Media, who have faithfully and expertly produced and archived our events, and if you want to send the link, and you will be notified when this is up to your friends, go to www.scribemedia.org/PGA, scribemedia.org/PGA. Peter runs a phenomenal group here, and talk to him afterwards if you need an event produced, streamed live. He's a real leader in that field, and will be at Streaming Media East next week. But back again to what you were saying.
Last thought I want to close, and then I was going to give you my business card. You know, the cause is great, and the movie is phenomenal, and we could really help you reach those
great.
Muslims. But last thought is that the times are changing so quickly. While I was speaking, I talked to Chris about an event that's happening in LA. I'm leaving there tomorrow. And just while you guys were, you know, talking, I texted him something. I sent him an invitation, which he accepted. He's on RSVP, and I got a confirmation he's on the list. So we are living in a very different time. I mean, we don't have to wait for things to happen. And exactly the same thing is happening with companies. The kids who are born today, they really do not know of a world without, you know, digital. So we really have to understand they are our customers. Their rules of engagements are very, very different. And these people will be, you know, I mean, people who were born in 1990, they're 21 years old today. So just think about that.
But add to that, and I want to get the panel's thoughts on this. Add to that this you know, idea of several decades of you know, as Majid was saying, I mean, you didn't grow up with Western culture, I mean, but you were able to see Battle of Algiers and Kurosawa. But now, you know, you have walls being broken down. So in a digital age, you have. I mean, is it a revolutionary act or is it expected? In other words, how, Ahmad, you know, for you, it was probably more revolutionary in 1984 to watch this stuff. You know, God knows what might have happened. But today, if you're in the Middle East... Break-In
and Grease and Flashdance were the revolutionary stuff.
There you go, you know, Jennifer Beals. Well, I mean, you know, but is it just expected today? Is it less revolutionary? I mean, you know, because that's an interesting point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we don't know. Yeah. And that's an important part to understand. And also, when we talk about the behavior and culture, the way, I don't have kids, so I can't use my kids, but the way Tarek's kids are sort of essentially engaging online may be completely different in 2 years. And in fact, it will be completely different in 2 years because the entire technological landscape will be different in 2 years. But what will be the same is the fact that people do things in communities. And I think that's a fundamental change. The fundamental change is that during the 1990s, when Twin Peaks came out, which was my favorite TV show, and after it stopped, I stopped watching television, as a protest.
Did
it was-
Mr. Lynch pay you to say that?
No. And I wasn't even in the film business by then at that time. But what was true was that if you watch Twin Peaks, I don't know if you've watched it or not, it was really hard to figure this thing out. It was really hard, and it was by design very difficult. And it turned, I remember I would talk to everybody about it, and people would be like, I don't get it. I don't get it. And what has fundamentally changed was that Twin Peaks had a very niche audience, has a very devoted audience, so people that didn't mind being confused, didn't mind having to figure things out. And even then, I think there was an online, who was talking about this? Somebody was talking about that there's an online, even then there was an online space where you could go and talk to other people about what was going on.
Yeah, CompuServe had in the forums.
So, but what today?
Old school.
Today, you need to have complicated content because people consume content in masses, which no longer are you left in the room with your with your movie and you've got to fend for yourself. You're online. If you're not online at the same time, if you're below a certain age, you're online afterwards. You're talking about it. You're conversing about it. You're gonna put it on your Facebook page, and other people are gonna talk to you about it and ask questions about it. So immediately, you're creating education around content and engaging around content. And so we consume content and we consume these things in a community, and that is dramatically different than it used to be before. And that is what's revolutionary.
And that's, again, back to Tarek's point about, this explosive growth. I mean, the fact that you've created this superlative with Muxlim, it's, the idea would be that yes, you can still maintain, again, as with any powerful brand in a particular audience, but spawn other, whether it's a microsite or it's some other, kind of spin-off.
We have 10 million users, and we didn't do that, by the way. I just want to ask a question. In 10 years, what will be the largest country in the world?
China.
Facebook, really. Mark Zuckerberg started, out of his school, and he has already crossed 600 million, and this just came out of just an idea. And there'll be two kinds of people in this world who have Facebook or who are not on the Facebook. And the people who are on the Facebook would be larger. And if we really look at it, and he has not even started monetizing that.
No.
He's sitting with the largest database in the world that has all the information. So anytime you have done anything on the Facebook, anything that you have said and you chatted with somebody, he could sell that. The little thing that you clicked, when you got on that, your information is really, he's sitting with in marketing, we said that data is important, and once we analyze that.
And that data becomes even more, that data is a bank.
Yeah.
Facebook is going to be a bank, and everything that you put on there gives them a wonderful credit profile of you, your spending profile, your attitude profile.
He has not even monetized that part of the business, so we are really living in a totally different world today.
Well, I think that we also have the best example of the power of social media, where we're all witness to a revolution in a part of this world that's going to change the entire world, because young people got information through social media, information that was never allowed in their countries before. And I think, I also have a question. How many people here are filmmakers? And of the people raising their hand, how many are Muslim?
Would anyone like to convert tonight?
Yeah.
Just one thing that I don't want to forget to talk about is I'm going to use rough numbers, don't quote me on my numbers. In the last several years, there were 79 or so films made with Muslim characters, and less than 5% of those films had a Muslim character that wasn't a villain or a terrorist. And I think, though, for all of us who are filmmakers or people who create content, and yes, there's social media. I think that everything that we do in our lives, we need to be responsible people. My first film was Have Plenty, and it was in the late 90s about, college-educated black people. And it was like, oh my God. And, I'm never afraid of, going against the grain or making a film that doesn't seem popular and helping find its audience. I did a film in India. I did, I've done so many films that nobody else would do, and I'm still working. So I just wanted to ask everybody to be responsible. We're sitting here at a Muslim panel. We're talking about social media. We're talking about people who create content, people like you, like all of us up here, and just tell those stories. There's only two things that matter in film: story and performance. So when you're writing those stories, girl in the background, the girl, this character, well, what if her head was wrapped and she happened to be Muslim? We can do that. And what if my lead happens to be Muslim and we see him pray? And, we just need to make it part of, our country has a history of, first our country hates somebody, they are racist against that person, and then that person does really well. So, first it was the Japanese, then it was the African Americans in the 60s, and then it was, women, then it was gay people, now it's Muslims. So, hey, what's coming next here for the Muslims?
Well, I think the Methodists will be the next great hated group. I just, I can't stand, no, just kidding. I'm sorry. No, I think that part of the community building aspect of all this gets into something that, and some of us here who have know Mark Morey, who's a member of the Guild, as a two-time Academy Award nominated documentary filmmaker. I was chairing a panel at History Makers with Mark and a few other PGA members and a woman, Vicky Sahaios, who did the social media campaign for The Cove, if you remember, which won the Oscar. Great film. And Mark is doing this film on Betty Page, the famous pinup figure. And it's still not finished, but he found his way into creating an online and mobile community that may even be infinitely more lucrative than the film. And back to talking about transmedia, this has been going on for 2 years, and what he thought was kind of this, I'll dabble in here, and maybe it'll help boost interest in the film, and I'll get into all these, people who collect posters and whatnot. It's like, no, you've created your own world. So what better place than to work this through different communities? There is no one Muslim community. Obviously, we haven't even, that's at least 20 other panels here.
Yeah.
But Modest, from the standpoint of marketing, with Muslims. Now I would think, as I said, that leading indicator, maybe by the end of this year, we'll start to see some of that dissipate a little. At least we hope so, right?
Sure. I think with your film, it's amazing because what's often underestimated is African Americans are the majority of Muslims in this country. And people forget that because they have a very specific picture of who it is, and they're often ignored. And I think that one of the great things about your film is that it highlights that and the diversity that makes up this community. And the more that they're utilized and the more that, people like Tarek and Mahyad and you as well are all doing these projects, and it gives different opportunities and different perspectives.
I think the country is not a melting pot anymore. It's a salad bowl where everybody's keeping their identity and they're proud of it. With multicultural person, you buy one, get one free. So what you pay for the, what you pay for the skill and what you're getting is a cultural experience.
I don't want to paint an entirely rosy picture. I think that we're kind of kidding ourselves about there are major challenges that are faced by this community, and those challenges are not just economic, they're social, they're political, and it doesn't go away. And I think that, in this period of time, the amount of pressure that has been on the community as well is something that shouldn't be underestimated. The wars that are happening, they affect all of us, and they affect a very specific demographic in this country even more so. And I think when you look at some of the political actions that are continue to be acceptable, especially in the past couple of years.
That's true, but we talk about it's almost like a global feedback loop. The idea that I started out talking about I want my Al Jazeera this evening. I would want some kid and I would have said, hey, I want my revolution too. Come on, let's do it. But in a way that's really meaningful. But I think that even that aspect of it can't be held back by, kind of a mainstream narrative. And that's the other aspect of it, is that there's so many stories. Dana, your film, who knows where that world goes? Because there are so many things out there for people to discover. Legally and illegally, it doesn't matter in terms of how somebody is going to get paid in the end, but it's back to your point, Modest. Nobody's kidding anybody here on one hand. On the other hand, there's some great examples of what we can do to change things. And this is now my turn to turn it over to questions here so we can engage with you. You've been very patient. Ask your question, sir.
I have a feeling the role of social media in this Arab Spring Revolution is overrated. I have personal experience in that, coming from India. Back at the Nehru University, it is a question, so can I explain a little bit?
Go ahead.
We used to write pamphlets in the morning, all night long, print it, and 4 o'clock we put it on the dining table. That's when we did the struggle against caste system back home. But in order to have a struggle, you have to have the basic radicals. And they use whatever that is available, maybe the cyclostele machines at that time, but now the Twitter, Facebook, and all. I think it is the Facebook that did the revolution, I think, is a misnomer. I think the whole role of this, everything, social media can do anything, I think it is overrated. It can do a lot of things, but you have to have those basic radicalism, people that's willing to sacrifice their lives. Then only anything can happen. If that is not there, all these years, this all media is there, can do nothing.
Can I answer to that? Or
Yeah,
can I
go
say
ahead.
something? I
Yeah.
actually I have to agree with him on a number, and earlier this week, I was having coffee with Ayman Mohyeddin, who many of you may know from Al Jazeera. And I brought the same thing up with him. I said, listen, everyone jumps up and down and says, Iran had this, and now Egypt had this, and that was because of Facebook and because of Twitter. But anyone who's been there and saw that there were bread riots months before this revolution, would be missing the boat and understanding how many people actually have access. And he also agreed with what you're saying, if I can have the liberty of paraphrasing him, but he did say that he felt that that Facebook itself serves as a bullhorn, and that all of that mentality that goes into an uprising, those are things that the people at various class levels, and I think that's an important distinction to make, at various class levels feel. But it becomes an aggregate of those emotions, and it's not that that's what propels people to stand out in the street. It's the conditions in which they're living under that propels them to go into the street and to risk their lives and to often give their lives. But it doesn't mean that there wasn't a role that those two didn't play, and that role wasn't maybe the bullhorn, as he put it, isn't the thing that made us all listen, that didn't get the attention of the West and didn't get it wasn't the thing that got the attention of the kids in China or in Hawaii or wherever it is that they may be. So it's not that it's not a valuable thing, and it's not that it's not a major contributor. But you're right, it wasn't the whole reason. It's my opinion.
And we got lucky. We got lucky in that exactly what Tariq was saying about his kid being on the phone. So culturally speaking, the older generation, one of the biggest schisms in that region is the fact that there's a generational conflict between the older generation and the kids, and that's what is true across the region. One of the realities is that people in the older generation don't understand how their kids think, how they organize, how they communicate, how they socialize, and because of that, they were open and susceptible to the power of social media as an organizing tool, because they didn't know that all this stuff was going on, because they just don't, it's trivial.
I think you're right.
Can I just, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Go ahead.
I think you're right. Social media is not the only thing that changed it, but you have to understand the transition that's taking place. We call this cell phone. The kids call it a phone because that's the only phone they know. We call it social media. They only call it media because they don't. To them, that's the entire media, and that's how it's going to be. So, the Apple TVs of the world and all that, television watching is really slowly going away from the next generation. So what social media did is complemented that. Hosni Mubarak allowed social media 10 years ago in Egypt, had no clue that he's going to be Facebooked. Had he known that, he would have never allowed that.
He could have called Ahmed
yeah,
Najjar.
and that thing alone really became a liability at that point. So you're absolutely right. That is not the only core that changed it, but it played a critical role, and I think going forward, it'll play even a more critical role.
Yeah, I just want to add one little thing to that as well. I agree with that. Also, it took courage. However, when you have countries that have state-run television and your information has been controlled for many years, and now suddenly you have an internet and social media where there is no controls over the information, I also agree that played a big part in helping people find the courage to get out there and have a revolution. They also had to know the date and time it was happening, right?
Yeah. Next question. Thanks.
Hi, my name is John Pratt. I've been interacting with Twitter for 8 months or so, thinking a lot about the fracking issue that we have in New York. And I find that it helps you to refine the message. When you start to talk to people, you see which arguments you get traction on. And then you can gain sort of momentum. So I think in a way it may be underrated for that, because you can find out which things are moving people, which aren't, and then those can gain momentum. So.
Panelists want to comment on that a little?
Thank you. I'm wondering if anybody's tweeting from here.
I am.
now.
I hope so, you know. I mean, when we do these events, we say, look, you know, yes, put mute on your Ring, but tweet away, you know. I mean, and by the way, and this is not, you know, particularly germane to Muslim themes, but how many people in this audience have been at events, whether it's one of ours or other events, where you're learning something about what's going on at the event from tweets that you're reading? Right? I mean, at Produced By conference, I think it was last year when Mark Cuban was on stage, and I couldn't see that he had taken off his shoes and his socks, and somebody had tweeted, "Ooh, wow, how awful, he took off his shoes and his socks." And I thought, well, you know, that's just one small example, but you're getting, you know, 720, not 360 degrees, and in that case, it's olfactory as well. Next question, thank you for that. Yeah.
I also wonder how much of a detriment this is to your level of ability to pay attention.
Yeah.
Because I'm actually sitting here thinking, my God, if people were just on there tweeting, like I can't write, listen, think all at the same time. And I actually really wonder what that's doing to our young people's attention
Well, I mean,
span.
I want to do a follow-up to Rao's question, and one of the things I was certainly going to ask, because it plays into this idea of what Mayad said about the generational schisms. We've known, you know, particularly any of us who've been around, you know, the internet for 15 to 20 years, that any country can block internet traffic at the node, at whatever head ends, with whatever filters, and we've seen that recently. So yes, you can start the ball rolling, and it may get cut off. Egypt certainly, you know, I think was the test case for what not to do when your country is having a digital revolution. On one hand, on the other hand, sadly enough, these things can stop very brutally, and I think it gets to the point of, you know, what you were saying about pamphleteering, about people who are putting their lives on the line for causes. At a certain point, yes, the bits end and the atoms begin, so to speak. And I think that's a realization that you know, particularly young people have to get to. I mean, we have enough issues in this country, but then the next question is, how does that leap across, you know, the bounds? And I would hope that young Muslims who are fighting for their lives would not have the kind of ADD that, you know, we all like to decry with U.S. youngsters. That's my little soapbox there. Next question.
Facebook and Twitter, social media were not necessarily the driving force behind the Arab Spring. But one thing you can count on, one thing we all know, I think it's undoubted, is that story was a driving element in the Arab Spring. And the one thing that, to again agree with many of you here tonight, that I certainly agree with, and we're involved business-wise in this sort of thing, is that social media does help to galvanize and simplify story. And when you do keep it simple, no más FARC, no más sangre, a very simple slogan which united all of Colombia against the FARC, an organization that committed a lot of violence there. You are peeling away differences and factions and uniting a whole people in the name of the simple narrative. And that is enormously powerful and capable of moving entire nations. I certainly think that there are elements in what each of you are doing that is kind of galvanizing narrative and bringing it back out to people and maybe causing them to shift their perceptions a little bit.
Think of the story of these, you know, Tunis even, a better example, because let's say Iran and Egypt are so strategically important that they may have gotten some news, but Tunis would have never gotten any news. And the reason it got news is because of the fact that they independently self-distributed their own news out. And this is exactly the model. If the story is powerful enough, if you can communicate that story, if you can find your audience, you can get your audience to participate in that process with you, then your story will have legs. And you know, if you're, you know, obviously the best marketing campaign is to have a really good story and have that story picked up for free by every single news media outlet that's there. So, you know, Is it fundamentally functional in actually making a thing happen? No, absolutely not. But what would it look different if there was no Facebook and Twitter? It would look dramatically different, and I think that's the way to look at it. And also with regards to Egypt, and you would also have to call it the Al Jazeera revolution as well, just as much as it was the Twitter revolution, because they had a lot to do with it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, and I was
That's
going to say that if Julian Assange doesn't get a big shout out, because the fact is that I don't think that Mr. Bin Laden would necessarily be dead were it not for WikiLeaks, and that's a very, very interesting thing. I'm sure a lot of people don't want to say that, particularly in Washington, but that is, in fact, the truth. We have time for one more question, and then please don't go away. Buttonhole, we're going to take some photos with the panelists, but please, we can network here until about 10 or so. But last one goes to Rachel Watanabe-Batten.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to all of you, because
You wanna
all the
stand,
wealth of
Rachel?
information. So for coming. But I think I'm bright enough standing or sitting, so I'll sit. But I'm curious about sort of looking at the emerging markets, right? Whether it's MENA or Nigeria or any South Africa, South Asian population. But the use of mobile devices being more prevalent. I mean, I know when I'm in Nigeria, or in Africa, anywhere, you're using your cell phone to look at media, do everything. You don't have landlines most of the time. And then, on a broader scale, obviously, a lot of those devices are coming from China and who are funded. So thinking about how that influences, have you seen any change in the new media that's created and just content in general with that in mind in terms of how people around the world are receiving it, particularly in emerging markets you're reaching?
I mean, specifically in this region, probably the most successful stories and the most successful filmmakers in the Arab world is making new media content. This is Katia Saleh, Lebanese. Shankabut is the name of an online series about Lebanese kids. It's about sex, it's about drugs, it's about crime, it's about everything that a kid goes through in that part of the world. Again, part of the world that's incredibly young. The content is exclusively distributed via online and mobile, and it is extremely successful. She's won an Emmy. She's won every award that there has to be. The BBC Trust is funding her. And that's fundamentally, if you're not being funded, it's because you're not making the right content in the right medium to communicate with your audience. And unfortunately, there's a lot of content creators that are lazy. And they don't feel that that's their job. Unfortunately, the new world does not allow for that anymore. It is absolutely your job to know who your audience is and how you're going to reach them. And to Katia's credit, she did that, and and she didn't even know what gold mine she was sitting on, and it's incredible. But it's an amazing show. Hopefully, she'll be able to translate this, because I think everybody needs to see it very quickly. But that's a really good example. Shankabut, Shankabot. No, Shankabot. Sorry. Yeah. And it's mobile, definitely mobile. She's got a mobile
That'll
deal
be
now.
the next event, as I said, Muslim mobile producers, believe me.
Yeah.
So anyone here know Z Group? Excellent group out of Syria, doing incredible stories, and they're starting to push into the U.S. And Laura Al-Salam is one of their executives. We definitely would like to get them involved with your colleague as well. I think that's going to wrap it up from this side. Again, I'm Chris Paff. I'm the co-chairman of the PGA New Media Council East. I want to thank our panelists.